This is my true story. I was a father, a provider, a man who gave everything he had to keep his family standing. Every bill they owed, I paid. Every dream they chased, I funded. For years, my name meant comfort to them. But the day my pockets emptied, their love disappeared. The phone stopped ringing. The house fell silent. I was alive, but forgotten. Yet even in that silence, I made one final plan. One that would make them remember my name forever. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And subscribe so my story can reach more people. I spent my whole life helping my family. Every sunrise meant another reason to work, another bill to cover, another promise to keep. I was the first one awake and the last one to sleep. I paid every bill that came through the door, never letting any of them feel the weight of debt. When they needed money for rent, I gave it. When their cars broke down, I fixed them with my own hands, covered in oil but proud that I could still help. I believed that love was shown through effort. If they were happy, I was happy. I attended every birthday, bought gifts that made their faces light up, and stood beside every hospital bed through the years. I was there when they celebrated, and I was there when they cried. My heart belonged to them, and I thought that would be enough to keep us close forever. But time changed things. Their needs grew faster than my income. I was retired, but they still called when they needed something. They had jobs, but I was still the one they leaned on. My savings began to shrink, little by little, with every transfer, every check, every quiet favor that no one remembered later. I didn't complain. I told myself it was what fathers did. I didn't expect payback. I thought gratitude would come naturally. I covered wedding costs, house repairs, tuition fees, medical bills, even small business dreams that never worked. Every time one of them said they needed help, I opened my wallet without hesitation. I worked extra hours when I was already tired. I sold things I loved just to make sure they didn't have to struggle. The sound of their voices asking for help made me feel needed, important, alive. I didn't see that I was teaching them dependency, not love. At family gatherings, they called me generous. They said I was the heart of the family. Those words felt good, even if they were shallow. When I looked around the dinner table, I saw smiles that I thought were built on love, but they were built on what I provided. Money had become the invisible thread that kept us together. Without it, I was afraid everything would fall apart. And eventually, it did. The day came when my hands trembled while counting the last of my savings. The numbers no longer made sense. I had given more than I could afford. My pension barely covered the basics. I thought someone might notice, that one of them might offer help in return. No one did. They still called, still asked, still took. I said yes every time, hiding the truth from them, and from myself. Then, slowly, the calls began to space out. My health weakened, my energy faded, and my pockets emptied. When I told one of my sons I couldn't help that month, his tone shifted. When another needed a loan, I said I didn't have it. They said it was fine, but after that, the phone stayed quiet. The silence felt heavy, but I tried to understand. I told myself they were busy. I told myself it wasn't personal. Birthdays passed without messages. Holidays came and went with no visits. I started to realize that all those years of giving had built comfort, not connection. I was the provider, not the person. They loved what I gave, not who I was. The warmth that once filled my house vanished with my savings. The air grew still. I sat in the same living room that once echoed with their laughter and saw the truth clearer than ever. I had raised them to expect, not to care. Every gift, every payment, every sacrifice was now forgotten. I had believed that giving endlessly would buy love, but it only rented attention. When the rent expired, they moved on. Still, I didn't regret the years I helped them. I had done what any parent would. I gave everything I had, even when it hurt. I didn't know that love built on money disappears the moment the money does. My hands were empty now, but my mind was finally clear. The years I helped them were not wasted. They were my lesson. They showed me what family looks like when tested and what love truly means when nothing is left to give. The silence began quietly, almost soft enough to ignore. A missed call here, a delayed reply there. At first I thought they were busy. Everyone has work, families, lives. I told myself they'd call when things settled down. But days became weeks, and weeks became months. My phone stayed still, the screen dark, the sound of ringing gone. The house that once felt full began to echo with emptiness. I sat near the window, watching the street outside, pretending I was just resting. But deep down, I was waiting. Waiting for someone to remember I was still here. I used to hear their laughter through the phone, stories about their jobs, their kids, their plans. I used to be part of those plans. They shared everything when money moved between us. When that ended, so did my place in their lives. I became invisible in the same house I built, in the same family I created. My number became something they ignored. Messages I sent sat unread. Sometimes I checked if my phone had a problem. It didn't. The problem was me, or rather, what I no longer had to offer. Silence is not loud, but it hurts more than noise. It crawls into every corner of your heart and makes you doubt your worth. I began to question if I had done something wrong. Maybe I had spoken too much, given too much, cared too much. I tried reaching out again, sending small greetings, asking simple questions, pretending I wasn't lonely. Each time the replies were shorter. Each time the gap grew wider. Eventually, even those stopped. My phone became a cold piece of metal sitting beside my bed. It didn't light up anymore. The house around me seemed bigger with every passing week. The walls carried memories, but they couldn't talk back. I could still see their photos on the shelves, smiles frozen in time from days when we were together. I dusted them carefully, though no one came to notice. I walked through the rooms I once filled with laughter, now filled only with air. The dining table stayed clean because no one sat there anymore. The plates stayed untouched. The clock ticked, but it felt like it was counting the distance between me and them. Neighbors would sometimes wave from across the street. They probably thought my family visited often. They didn't know the truth, that behind my closed curtains, silence had become my only company. Even the birds outside seemed to know more about me than my own children. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was punishment in disguise. I had loved too loudly, and now I was being forgotten too quietly. I started to measure my days not by sunlight, but by silence. Morning silence, afternoon silence, evening silence. The kind that fills your head until your own heartbeat feels too loud. I waited for birthdays, hoping one of them would remember. The days passed untouched. No card, no call, not even a text. The calendar meant nothing anymore. I still looked at my phone every night before bed, scrolling through old messages. The words that once felt warm now burned. The same people who once said they'd never forget me had disappeared into their own lives. I realized I had built a family around noise, not around love. When the noise stopped, there was nothing left. The silence taught me something no one ever told me. Love that depends on giving is not love at all. It's a transaction that ends when the balance runs out. My life had become proof of that. I stopped trying after a while. I stopped sending messages, stopped waiting by the window, stopped hoping the doorbell would ring. Days became quiet shadows. I found comfort in routine, not people. The sound of my kettle boiling became my only company. The ticking of the clock became my reminder that I was still alive. There were no fights, no anger, no arguments, just silence, stretched endlessly like a winter that never ended. I didn't hate them. I didn't even resent them. I just understood what I meant to them. To them, I had become background noise, something easy to forget once life got louder. In that silence, something inside me hardened. I stopped feeling sad and started feeling clear. The truth was simple. I had spent a lifetime giving to people who only listened when money spoke. When it stopped speaking, so did they. Loneliness arrived slowly, like evening fog creeping through an open window. I began to live in quiet routines. One plate, one chair, one cup of tea. The house felt too big for one person. Every sound was my own. The clinking of a spoon, the creak of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, all reminders that I was alone. I would sit by the dining table and stare at the empty seats, remembering where each of my children once sat. The noise of those memories was louder than the silence around me. I used to think loneliness meant being without people. But it's worse than that. It means being forgotten by the people you lived for. I kept the radio on most days, not to listen, but to fill the space. The voices of strangers became my company. I listened to the weather, the news, the music from another time. Sometimes I talked back to the sound, just to hear my own voice in the room. Nights were the hardest. The ticking clock seemed louder, the air heavier. I would walk to the window and look at the lights in other houses, families eating together, laughter echoing faintly across the street. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were just to sit beside each other. My health began to weaken, but there was no one to notice. The pills on the shelf reminded me to take care of myself. I had no one left to remind me. Every morning, I wrote a small list of things to do. Sweep the porch, water the plants, make breakfast, rest. It gave the day a shape, even if it didn't have meaning. Sometimes I forgot to eat. Sometimes I ate too early just to pass time. The world outside kept moving while mine stayed still. I tried to reach out to neighbors, but life had made me quiet. Words didn't come easily anymore. I nodded, smiled, said I was fine. No one saw through it. People see what they want to see, and no one wants to see loneliness. They see an old man, not a hollow life behind his eyes. I started walking to the park in the evenings just to be near people. I sat on the same bench every day, watching others meet, talk, laugh, and leave together. I left alone, every time. The house began to feel like a museum of my past. Every photo on the wall was a lie. Smiling faces from better times stared back at me. I didn't take them down. I just stopped looking at them. Dust settled where love used to live. My hands aged faster, my shoulders bent lower, but my mind stayed awake, remembering everything too clearly. I remembered birthdays, graduations, and the days I stood proud beside my children. I wondered if they remembered me at all. Sometimes I thought about calling them again, just once more. But pride stopped me. Not anger, just quiet pride. The kind that comes when you realize begging for love won't bring it back. I had given them every piece of myself, and there was nothing left to offer. What would I even say? The words would fall into the same silence they always did. So I stayed still. I learned to live with the echo of absence. I watched the seasons change outside my window. Rain came and left. Leaves turned from green to brown. Snow covered the ground where I once played with my grandchildren. Time didn't stop. It just stopped including me. Every year felt shorter and quieter. Loneliness stopped hurting after a while. It became normal, like breathing in an empty room. Still, even in that emptiness, I didn't hate them. My heart had no space left for hate. I just stopped expecting anything. I understood that love without effort dies. I had been the effort for too long. I realized that family isn't who shares your name. It's who shows up when the world forgets you. Mine didn't. So I stopped waiting. The loneliness was heavy, but at least it was honest. It didn't pretend to care, didn't promise to visit, didn't vanish after taking what it wanted. That was my life now, quiet, cold, and real. I ate dinner alone, I slept alone, I woke alone. And for the first time, I accepted that this was how it would end. One morning, I woke up feeling weaker than usual. The pain in my chest came like a wave that refused to leave. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room that had once been full of life. The light from the window fell across the floor, touching the same walls that had seen my best and worst days. I understood something that moment. Time was no longer my friend. I had given everything I had to others, and there was nothing left to give but the end itself. It wasn't sadness I felt anymore, just quiet acceptance. My life had turned into a long echo, and I knew it was almost time for the last sound. I didn't want my story to end in silence. I wanted it to mean something, even if no one ever said it out loud. I knew my family would show up again one day, but not out of love. They would come for the reading of a will. That was how I had raised them, to come when there was something to take. And so, for the first time in years, I felt a small spark of control. If they would come for what I owned, then what I owned would speak for me. I called my lawyer. My voice shook, but my mind was steady. I told him it was time to make changes. Every paper, every signature, every word would now have a different meaning. I had spent my whole life signing checks for others. Now I would sign a message they could never erase. I opened the drawer that held my documents and began to sort them one by one. Bank statements, property deeds, certificates, proof of a life built on hard work, proof of everything they took for granted. As I went through each paper, I remembered who stood beside me in the years of silence. The nurse who brought me food when I was sick. The neighbor who cleared my path when it snowed. The church worker who knocked on my door just to ask how I was doing. They had no reason to care, yet they did. They asked for nothing and still gave kindness. They didn't know it then, but they had already earned my respect, and that respect was worth more than anything I could leave behind. I began writing my final notes. My hand was slow, but my purpose was sharp. Each line felt like closing a door that had been open too long. I wrote clearly, not out of anger, but out of truth. My family had forgotten me when I needed them most. Now, I would forget them in the only way that truly mattered. I didn't wish to punish them. I only wanted them to feel what I had felt. Absence. Not through words or emotion, but through silence from the inheritance they expected. I took out the will and rewrote every line. I made sure every word was clear, every instruction unchangeable. The money that once went to pay their bills would now go to those who gave me peace when no one else did. The house they ignored would become a home for someone who had none. Every cent, every item, every ounce of my effort would be used to lift others, not those who had stepped over me. When the final line was written, I felt lighter. I read the document again, not as a man with regrets, but as someone finally free. The burden of years fell off quietly, like dust from an old shelf. I placed the papers in a brown envelope and sealed it with calm hands. I told my lawyer to hold it safely until I was gone, and to make it public. I wanted them all to hear it together, in one room, with no excuses, no explanations. I wanted the silence I lived in to finally speak. That night, I sat by the window and watched the sunset fade behind the trees. The sky looked like it was on fire, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel cold inside. My heart still hurt, but not from loss, from release. I had made peace with my end. I knew that one day soon, they would gather expecting wealth and walk away with a lesson instead. My last plan wasn't revenge, it was truth, the kind that arrives when love is gone and justice is quiet. When the papers were done, I felt something shift inside me. It was as if the years of pain finally turned into purpose. I realized that wealth meant nothing if it went back to the same hands that never valued love. So I decided my last act would be different. My money would not reward greed. It would go to kindness, to the quiet people who gave when they had nothing to gain. I remembered faces more than names. The nurse who brought me soup when I couldn't stand. The neighbor who shoveled snow off my driveway without being asked. The man from the church who left groceries by my door when I had no strength to go out. They never expected a return. They gave because they cared. That was real wealth, the kind that can't be counted but can be felt. I went through my savings with care. Every number told a story. The long years of work, the sacrifices I once made for children who never looked back. This time, I chose where those numbers would live. The nurse would receive a home. The neighbor would have security. The church would get enough to keep helping others. Each choice felt like a small piece of balance returning to the world. I wasn't taking revenge. I was rewriting meaning. My money, once a tool for their comfort, was now a message about real gratitude. I imagined how my family would react when they learned. They would expect a grand inheritance, a reward for carrying my name. But they had long stopped carrying my love. They had buried it under pride, under selfishness, under silence. My will would show them what they lost, not in wealth, but in worth. The lawyer would read every line carefully. I had asked him to make it public, not to humiliate them, but to let truth breathe in open air. I wanted the people who once pitied me to see that I was never weak. I had only been patient. The real gift was not the money. It was the mirror it would hold up to their hearts. They would hear the names of strangers receiving what they assumed was theirs. They would hear about the nurse, the neighbor, the church. Each name would remind them of a kindness they never offered. Each signature would remind them of a chance they wasted to be human. I wanted them to feel something, not anger, not greed, but awareness, the kind that comes too late to fix. As I sealed the documents again, I thought about all the nights I spent wishing for one phone call, one voice saying, "Are you okay?" That never came. But now, it didn't matter. I wasn't leaving behind a fortune. I was leaving behind a message written in ink and truth. I wanted my life to end with balance, not bitterness. The people who gave without asking would finally receive. The ones who took without care would finally learn. I told the lawyer to deliver copies to every person named. I wanted them to have proof that kindness still had value in a world where family love had a price. I didn't want fame or recognition. I only wanted to leave the world a little fairer than I found it. It wasn't about forgiveness or punishment. It was about closing the circle. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The house still felt empty, but the emptiness didn't hurt anymore. The loneliness had purpose now. My choices had meaning. My story wasn't ending in silence. It was ending with truth. The people who once ignored me would one day sit in a room and hear my voice through words they could not interrupt. That would be my farewell, not in person, but in legacy. The next morning, the lawyer confirmed everything was in place. I thanked him quietly and sat by the window, looking at the small garden outside. The flowers were starting to bloom again. I realized that kindness, once planted, always grows somewhere, even if not where you expect. The real gift was never the money I left. It was the lesson hidden inside it. The day I left this world came quietly, without noise or struggle. The morning sun was gentle, resting on my window like a final visitor. My body was tired, but my heart was calm. I had done what I needed to do. There was no fear, no regret, only peace. I made my bed neatly, set my glasses on the table, and sat in my chair by the window, the same chair where I had watched the seasons pass. The air felt softer than usual, as if the world itself was whispering goodbye. My breath slowed. My hands, once strong, rested still. My eyes closed to the sound of distant birds, and in that silence, my heart stopped. Hours passed before anyone knew. No one knocked, no one called. The world outside moved on, unaware that my life had quietly ended inside these walls. It was not unexpected. I had lived in this stillness for years. The phone stayed silent, the door stayed closed. Death didn't arrive like a thief, it came like an old friend. I had nothing left to lose, nothing left to wait for. When the final moment came, it felt like sleep, deep, endless, kind. It wasn't until the lawyer tried to reach me that the news began to spread. The same lawyer who had helped me rewrite my will made the call that would change everything for my family. My children were informed first. They didn't cry on the phone, they didn't rush to my house. It took them 2 days to come. When they finally arrived, they wore expressions of shock, guilt, and confusion. They walked through the rooms I had kept clean for them, touching the furniture like strangers exploring a museum. The smell of old wood and dust greeted them instead of love. They stood in silence, looking at the life they had abandoned. They didn't notice the framed photos I had kept near my bed. They didn't notice the chair by the window where I took my last breath. They were only focused on what was left behind, the money, the property, the assets. They didn't mourn the man, they mourned the opportunity. They wore black for the funeral, not out of love, but for appearances. They cried when people watched, and fell silent when no one did. The same children who once ignored my messages now stood side by side pretending to grieve. The service was simple, arranged by the church that had helped me in my final years. I had left instructions for it to be modest, with no grand speeches or flowers bought in gilt. The same neighbors and volunteers who had shown kindness in my life stood in the front rows. My family stood behind them, unsure of where to look. Every hymn sung that day was for the quiet souls who give without being seen. I wasn't there to witness it, but I know it happened as I wanted, with truth instead of show. After the burial, they gathered at the lawyer's office. That was the first time in years they had all been in one place together. Their voices were low, their faces tight with expectation. They thought the end of my life meant a new beginning for their wallets. They waited for the papers that would confirm what they believed they deserved. They didn't know that the real moment waiting for them was not about inheritance. It was about realization. As my coffin rested in the ground, they sat in air-conditioned comfort, thinking about money, while strangers remembered me with sincerity. The contrast was clear. Death had drawn a line between the truth of love and the illusion of family. I had crossed that line in peace, leaving them to face what they had become. When the lawyer opened the folder on his desk, the room fell silent. My voice, once ignored, was about to speak again through ink and paper. My life was over, but my message was about to begin. The day I left this world was the day they would finally learn who I had become without them, a man who found peace in solitude and power in silence. The will reading took place 3 days after my burial. The lawyer's office was quiet, except for the sound of papers being arranged. My family arrived in expensive clothes, polished shoes, and forced faces of sorrow. They didn't come as mourners, they came as collectors. Each one sat waiting for their turn to hear their share. Their eyes didn't look at one another, only at the brown folder that held what they believed was their future. The same people who couldn't spare a call for years now sat shoulder to shoulder, pretending to care. They whispered small words of respect, but every heartbeat in that room was filled with greed. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. His voice was calm, steady, professional. The words on those pages were mine, every line chosen with care, every sentence written with purpose. The first part spoke of my life, the years of work, the sacrifices, the things I had done for the family sitting in front of him. Their faces softened, pretending to remember. But I knew the truth. They were only waiting for the numbers. The air grew heavier with every word until the lawyer reached the part they wanted most. He paused, then read the line that would shatter their comfort forever. To my family who forgot me, I leave memories of what real love looks like. The room fell still. The meaning sank in slowly. Their eyes darted between one another, trying to make sense of what they'd heard. The lawyer continued. The rest of the document listed the names of people they had never met: the nurse, the neighbor, the church. Each one received what my children once believed was theirs. The lawyer read out every amount, every piece of property, every account. The total was more than they had imagined. Each word was a mirror reflecting their neglect. The nurse was granted the savings account, the one I built through decades of work. The neighbor received the deed to my house. The church was given the remaining balance from the insurance and a small trust fund to continue helping others. The lawyer explained that everything had been legally sealed and witnessed months ago. There was no loophole, no clause, no hope to change it. What had once been their expected treasure was now gone, not to strangers, but to souls who had shown humanity where they did not. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. My sons lowered their heads, their faces pale and stiff. My daughters gripped the arms of their chairs, their breaths shallow. The image of control they always carried broke in a single moment. They had lived believing that my money was their safety net, that my love was an endless source they could draw from forever. But now, in a quiet office, they saw the truth. The father they ignored had left behind something stronger than wealth: justice. The lawyer finished reading and placed the papers down. No one spoke. The air carried the sound of heavy breathing and hidden panic. The same mouths that once demanded now trembled in silence. A lifetime of expectation turned into a few lines of loss. The shock was not about the money. It was about the realization that their power over me had ended the moment I stopped breathing. In life, they had forgotten me. In death, I had made sure they remembered. Outside the office, the world carried on. Cars passed by, people walked, the sun shone like any other day. But inside that room, time had stopped for them. They had come to claim a fortune and left with emptiness. The lawyer's words echoed in their minds long after they left. Memories of what real love looks like. They couldn't buy that, couldn't fight for it, couldn't undo it. My voice, silent for years, had finally spoken through ink and truth. That was my final act. Not out of bitterness, but out of balance. I had given them everything once and received nothing in return. Now, they had received what they had given. Nothing. The will reading wasn't a punishment. It was a reflection. The moment when the mirror finally turned toward them. And for the first time, they saw themselves clearly. The reaction came like a storm that had been waiting for years. The moment the lawyer finished reading, the room that had been quiet filled with chaos. My sons leaned forward, demanding to see the papers, their voices rising in disbelief. My daughters buried their faces in their hands, pretending to cry, though the tears were not for me. They were for what they had lost. The will had taken away not only their inheritance, but also their illusion of control. For the first time in their lives, they couldn't change the outcome. The signatures, the witnesses, the stamps, everything was final. There was no argument, no appeal, no reversal. The lawyer's calm voice only deepened their panic. Some shouted, some cried, others sat in silence, staring at the floor. The oldest son hit the table so hard the pen rolled off. The youngest looked around helplessly, searching for someone to blame. They had built their comfort on the belief that I would always be there to provide. But I had given my final gift, a truth they could not ignore. The house they wanted to sell, the money they wanted to divide, the land they wanted to claim, all gone. Each loss was a mirror of what they had done to me. When they ignored my calls, I lost their voices. Now, they had lost mine forever. The lawyer sat still, letting the silence work as punishment. The papers in front of him carried the power I never used when I was alive. Every sentence they heard was like a reflection of the years they turned away. My absence had spoken louder than any word I could have said. The man they forgot had finally made them remember. Their eyes turned red, their pride collapsed, their rehearsed grief dissolved into shame. They had come expecting wealth, but left with guilt. The neighbors heard about the scene later. Word spread through whispers. How the children of the old man cried during the will reading, how they argued, how they begged. People who once envied them now pitied them. The story of my will became a quiet legend in the town, a lesson about love, greed, and truth. The nurse who received the savings cried real tears, not for the money, but for the thought that kindness had been remembered. The neighbor who got the house said it would always stay open to anyone in need. The church used the donation to help more families. My legacy had turned into something living, something good, while theirs had turned into silence. At night, each of them returned to their homes carrying the weight of what they had done. The cars they drove, the clothes they wore, the comfort they flaunted. None of it could hide the emptiness that followed them. They tried to sleep, but guilt doesn't rest. They thought of me, of the old man sitting alone, of the messages they never answered. Every ignored call, every missed visit, every forgotten moment came back to haunt them. The tears they cried that day were the ones I used to hold back in silence. They came too late, but they came. Days later, the lawyer's office received letters from them, not for apology, but for appeal. They wanted to change the will, to question the decisions, to find loopholes, but there were none. Everything was sealed, legal, final. Their power had ended with my last breath. What they couldn't understand was that they were never punished by money. They were punished by truth. They had lost access to me long before they lost access to what I owned. The will only revealed what had already been broken. The ones who once ignored me now had to live with the echo of my choice. Their tears at the will reading were not of love. They were of loss. The loss of what they took for granted. The loss of an easy life built on someone else's sacrifice. I had spoken louder in death than they ever did in life. And through that silence, I finally found peace. News of the will spread through the town faster than my family could hide it. Neighbors talked about it in grocery lines, church halls, and bus stops. Some called it justice, others called it heartbreak. But everyone agreed on one thing. It was a lesson. My name, once spoken with pity, was now spoken with respect. The story of the man who gave everything and was forgotten had turned into a warning that people couldn't stop sharing. My children, who once carried pride like armor, now carried shame like a shadow. They couldn't face questions from friends or co-workers. People who used to admire them now looked with quiet judgment. No one felt sorry for them. They knew the truth. Their houses became silent too, just like mine had been. The same silence they once gave me returned to them, heavier than they expected. They ate dinners without appetite, scrolled through their phones without focus, stared at the things they owned without joy. Their wealth felt hollow because they knew how easily it could have been theirs, if only they had cared. They tried to comfort each other, but guilt doesn't share space. Each one blamed the other for how things ended. The unity they once pretended to have crumbled like old wood under weight. The neighbors, meanwhile, respected the decision. The nurse continued to visit the grave and place fresh flowers every week. The church lit a small candle in my memory, not for wealth, but for gratitude. The house I once lived in now echoed with laughter again, from the new family who lived with kindness instead of greed. The same walls that once held loneliness now held love. It was as if the air itself had changed. My absence had planted peace where pain once lived. My family tried to move on, but every attempt reminded them of what they lost. They couldn't escape the story that followed them. The papers had written about it, calling it the quiet will. Reporters said it was a message about love forgotten and loyalty tested. The story reached people far beyond the town. Strangers read it and saw themselves in it. Some cried, some changed, some called their parents after years of silence. My death had become more useful to others than my life ever was. That was the strange beauty of truth. It finds ears that deserve to hear it. I wasn't alive to see the change, but I can imagine it. My sons sitting alone in their big houses, realizing that their money couldn't fill the space left by their father. My daughters looking at old photos, realizing they had been rich in love once and poor in heart later. The shame didn't vanish. It lingered like smoke after fire. They learned that wealth without kindness means nothing, and comfort built on neglect collapses in time. That was the lesson left behind, simple, sharp, and unforgettable. The people who used to call me weak for being too generous now spoke of me as strong. They said I had done something few could do: forgive without reward, love without return, and teach without words. I didn't leave behind revenge. I left behind reflection. The will didn't destroy my family. It revealed them. It showed the world how love dies when gratitude is forgotten, how silence becomes a mirror when the heart stops caring. Even years later, the story lived on. The nurse's children grew up knowing my name, not as a rich man, but as a man who gave meaning to kindness. The church hung a small plaque that read, "He gave love where it was remembered." My family, meanwhile, lived quietly, avoiding attention. They couldn't escape the memory of the moment they realized money was never love. Every anniversary of my passing was a reminder, not of my death, but of their failure to live with grace. The lesson was simple. Love given freely is priceless, but love given conditionally is temporary. What you ignore in life will one day speak in your absence. My voice had been quiet for too long, but through the will, it became eternal. I finally had peace, and they finally had silence. When I had money, they called me father. When I lost it, they forgot my name. That truth stayed buried inside me for years, but death gave it a voice. I learned too late that love built on wealth is not love at all. It is business disguised as care. Still, I don't blame them completely. The world teaches people to chase comfort, not connection. But comfort fades. Connection lasts. My life became proof of that. I spent decades believing that giving endlessly would create loyalty. All it created was dependence. They didn't love me. They loved what I made their lives feel like. And when that feeling disappeared, so did they. Now, my story lives beyond me. Somewhere, a father listens and decides to save a little for himself. Somewhere, a mother realizes her time is worth more than her money. Somewhere, a son calls home because he remembers what silence costs. If my pain becomes their awakening, then none of it was wasted. Every tear, every lonely night, every forgotten birthday built the message that lives on now. That kindness without respect becomes slavery. And no heart deserves to die that way. I imagine them sometimes, sitting together on quiet nights, not speaking, not laughing, just thinking. The lawyer's voice still rings in their minds. Those simple words, memories of what real love looks like. It must echo like thunder in their hearts. They know they cannot undo it. They know I didn't act in anger, but in truth. The kind of truth that exposes what time hides. I never wanted revenge. I only wanted them to feel what I felt, to face the silence they gave me. My absence is their reminder now. My grave is not a place of sorrow. It is a mirror. Every time they visit, they see the version of themselves that could have chosen love, but didn't. Years will pass, and their wealth will fade. Their children will grow, and one day they too will face the same question. What is love worth when there is nothing left to give? Maybe then they will understand me. Maybe then they will teach differently. If they do, then my story will not end in bitterness, but in change. The world needs more people who give from heart, not from pride. That is what I hope remains of me. Not the pain, not the loss, but the quiet strength of letting go. I hope those who read or hear about me remember one thing. Family is not blood, it is behavior. The people who stood beside me in my final days had no relation to me, yet they showed more love than those who shared my name. Blood connects bodies, kindness connects souls. In the end, it was the souls around me that mattered. They didn't come for what I had, they came because they cared. That is real wealth, to die known, not owned. The will was not just a legal paper, it was my final heartbeat written in words. It said everything I never could while alive. It told the world that money can buy comfort, but never loyalty, can build houses, but not homes, can attract people, but not hearts. I had spent years confused about this, but as I left the world, I finally understood. Love given for profit dies in silence, but love given in truth echoes forever. My family cried at the will reading not because I was gone, but because for the first time they could not take anything from me. My death was not their loss of a father, it was their loss of control. They would have preferred my money over my memory, but the world doesn't work that way. Life is a circle. What you take without thanks will someday be taken from you without warning, and when that moment comes, it will not ask for forgiveness. It will simply remind you. Now, even in my absence, I exist, not as a forgotten man, but as a lesson written in silence. I don't haunt them with pain. I haunt them with truth. Every quiet moment in their homes is a whisper from my story. I rest in peace knowing that I left behind something greater than inheritance, understanding. And in that understanding, I am finally free.